News Radio. Everything you need to know. Now, Newsline PM with Ken Schram.
Got you here at 6 minutes past the hour of 1 o'clock. Thank you very much for hooking up and hanging with me on Newsline PM. I appreciate that a lot. Let me give you some background here. The U.S. Census Bureau projects that by the year 2030, there will be 9.5 million people 85 and older. That's up well over 70% from today. And safety analysts who are looking at this are saying, you know, by the time we hit that 2030, which is when all the baby boomers are at least 65 years old, they're going to be responsible for, well, who we're going to be, I'm including myself here, responsible for 25% of all fatal crashes. We live in an era here where the population is getting older. We are on the cusp of the baby boomer generation just flooding into the elderly ranks. And we look at this tragedy that occurred yesterday. Officials say these three women had just finished eating lunch. They were up on Aurora Avenue North and got into the car to leave. And as they were putting on their seat belts, the elderly driver apparently hit the gas pedal and instead of the brake, and the car just ripped across the parking lot. It smashed into a pole, it jumped the curb, and then crashed into the side of this fabric store. One woman is dead, and the other two are in critical condition at Harborview Hospital. Like I say, we have talked about this several times on the program. And I think it's time to put a more serious tone to the conversation, because I think we need to begin. This is a very difficult issue for a lot of families. Chris Davis is an attorney who has a particular area of expertise here, joins us this afternoon on Newsline PM. Thank you for being here, Chris. I appreciate it a lot.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
This is a very difficult issue, not only for families, but for legislators, is it not?
Absolutely. I think, one of the first questions that we need to answer is, how do we define elderly? At what age do we determine someone that might have issues related to that age that might render that person an unsafe driver? And then two, how do we, in fact, legislate or regulate those people if it's determined that the additional regulation is needed to prevent these types of accidents that are being caused by elderly drivers?
So how do we kickstart that? And just anecdotally, let me tell you that, when we did this topic, I think it was like a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks ago, and there were several things that I had suggested at the time. And I got like a ton of email from people, who are saying, look, I will not let my parents drive my children anymore. The grandma and grandpa can't take the kids to the zoo. They can't take them to the movies. They can't take them to the mall. They can't go to the park because they are so fearful of how their elderly parents drive. And confronting that, like I say, is, you're talking about taking someone's freedom away. I mean, this is a significant issue.
Well, absolutely. And I have to preface this topic by telling you, if you look at the statistics in Washington State alone, the DOT for Washington keeps track of these numbers. And if you look at 2010, and if you look at the fatality and serious accident cases, only about 6% of those accidents were caused by elderly people defined as 75 years and older. By the same comparison, individuals who are 25 years and younger, 16 to 25 age group, are responsible for about 36% of these types of serious accident cases. So getting back to your question, it really comes down to how do we define who is elderly and who is not. Right now in Washington State, your driver's license only has to be renewed every 5 years. For somebody that turns age 65, that renewal has to occur in person. But the 65-year-old does not have to, retake a driving test unless there's some medical issue. So perhaps if we were to agree on an age that we could define as elderly drivers, As far as regulation, I would suggest perhaps at some point, perhaps 75 or 80 years old, require the renewal process to occur maybe every year. Or perhaps have that person's medical doctor sign off on a clearance that the person is safe to drive. Those would be good suggestions, in my view.
And I think as a provision to that, I think it should also include someone of a, again, select the age, pick 75, that person, when they go to renew their license, has to do more than just stick their forehead against that little, color reader, and perhaps needs to be required to take an actual driving test, to show that they are still capable and proficient at driving.
Yeah, and it also has to be balanced, as you said earlier, with the important concern of not unnecessarily restricting somebody's right to drive. And I think we've all seen people in their 70s and 80s who appear, healthy and robust and so forth. So again, how do you balance those two countervailing concerns?
Well, the first thing I would say is, and I hate to correct you, but I don't think there is a right to drive. Driving is a privilege. I don't think we have the right to drive. It is a privilege that we've earned and garnered, but it's not like in the Constitution. Everybody has the right to drive.
Yeah, I agree with that, Ken. But if you're talking about, let's say, a 75-year-old who's had a perfect driving record, and then just to automatically, arbitrarily say, hey, your driving privileges need to be restricted because you turn this, age, I think that's unduly harsh. I think you've got to consider other factors involved here. So even though driving is a privilege, when it comes to taking away that privilege or severely restricting it, I think we have to balance the concerns of that individual.
Okay, I see what you mean. So how do we get this? How do we serve as a catalyst to look at the changes that are perhaps necessary? Do we go to the legislature? Do we go to the licensing bureau? Who kickstarts this?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think there are several groups that probably would need to be consulted, not the least of which would be the legislative body. I think also the medical community we should ask them for their input on, what point or what age do people begin to lose their physical capabilities significantly to the point where driving is going to be, a dangerous activity. I think we need to talk to lawmakers about how we draft and implement any type of a restriction. I think you're going to get a number of different viewpoints on the age range that needs to occur before some sort of restriction occurs. I've heard people say 60, 65 on the low end, and I've heard people say 85 on the high end. There's got to be a point where most of us would agree that at some age that your renewal process becomes just a little bit more restrictive, or that a medical clearance is going to be required by the doctor. But as far as how all these changes are implemented, that's a great question.
Okay, I think that's what we're going to have to begin moving toward. Chris Davis, an attorney, helping us out here, trying to understand what we need to do concerning elderly drivers. I appreciate your being here today, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken.
Good talking with you.
Bye-bye.
In a moment, we're going to open this up and see what you think. 206-421-1000. Hang with us.
KOMO AAA traffic and weather every 10 minutes on the 4s.